Hello friends, it's Lisa. Welcome back to my channel. Today's video is I'm casing the card that's there on the left. The one on the right is the one I end up creating. And the card I'm casing is from Copycat Cards and Creations. The woman who is behind Copycat Cards and Creations, her name is Sharon, and she's so nice. She makes such pretty, beautiful cards. She has an awesome Instagram and a blog, and I believe a Facebook as well. So you can follow her on any or all of those different mediums, but she makes the prettiest cards. So here I'm showing you her blog. Now I'm showing you her Instagram and some of the amazing cards that she made. When I reached out to her and asked her if she'd be okay with me recreating her card and sharing it here on YouTube, she was so kind and she said, "Sure, of course. Which card are you going to do?" And I froze because I had no idea. I was able to whittle it down to about 5, and then I had to sit and think for about 3 days before I decided on which exact card I was going to do. So I picked it because it's a little bit different than what I usually make, and I thought I could stretch myself. I don't have the exact stamps or papers that she has, so I'm trying to recreate it with things I already own. So I took this lovely stamp set that Christina Warner designed and found kind of a similar style as well. I think that she used 2 different pattern papers in the background. I don't have a whole lot of pattern paper and absolutely nothing that looks anything like what she used. But I do have some vintagey stamps, so I figured I could recreate some of that paper on my own card. Even if it's not the exact same, it'll be close enough. So here I'm showing you kind of some of the stamps that I'm going to be using. That book was the Anna Griffin Treasury of Stamps. Also using some Tim Holtz stamps. If you have some Tim Holtz stamps, you should be completely fine to recreate any kind of vintage background. Next, I'm stamping out that big wreath of flowers from the stamp set by Christina Warner I showed you earlier, and I dropped it. So I just decided to keep going. I just won't use that little piece of the paper. I put some more amalgam ink, so this is the Gina K amalgam ink, and I'm stamping it down. I get really good results when I stamp and hold it down for a minute. It gives the ink time to actually transfer. I then took this single kind of rose stamp that's in the middle of that wreath and stamped it twice. I decided that since the coloring was so different than what I'm used to or have ever done before, that I should stamp it twice just in case I mess it up, which was really good because I did. So you'll see that I've colored the first one, but I'm recoloring it again, making some adjustments. Here we go. The first thing I did was I took the chisel end of this W0 marker and just colored it all across. I colored outside the lines because I knew I was going to be fussy cutting this, and it's okay. The light color actually helps in the end because then the little bit of outline that I leave is kind of the same tone. Next, I'm taking the W2 marker and adding in some shadows or low light areas. I'm pretty generous with the low light areas because really in the end that W2 becomes the mid-tone marker, and you really want quite a lot of that so that your highlights are really highlights and it helps it look dimensional. That's something I've really been working on in my own coloring and drawing, is contrast is critical. Anyway, so moving on, I took some of the caramel color, and I can't think of the name, and I'm actually on a business trip right now, so I'm in a hotel. I will link, I'll write out in the description what colors I used so that you can know, and I'll put those in order from lightest to darkest. But I took the lighter caramel color and added in some of that color around the edges as well as in the shadows. Then I took the darkest caramel color and added even more. Now I'm kind of moving backwards from dark to light and blending that all together. If you'll notice on Sharon's card, she had that caramel color on some of the edges. I never would have thought to do that, but it looks amazing, and it's such a fun detail, and it gives this old vintage, old world style, which I was in love with. So it's definitely something I will be copycatting from now on to really add interest to florals. I thought it was just such a fun, amazing technique. So I finished coloring, and I'm going back through and adding some black pen, and this is just a pilot pen, to, I don't know what those are called, in the middle of the flower, the little seedy parts, I don't know, stamen or something like that. Whatever those things are, I thought they needed to be darker to show up a little bit more. Next, I'm doing the greenery, and I've just colored the greenery. I'm going to cut out the flowers. I don't need them, so I'm not coloring them. I do color that little bud though. So I went with the lightest green. I'll go in with the medium, then the darkest, and then I'll go back in with the medium and the light. So that's what I'm showing you here. Sometimes when you're coloring, you're going to want to go light, medium, dark, medium, light. But on this, there was so little room that just going light, medium, dark, medium, light worked out perfectly. And the medium color was a little bit more vibrant than the light and the dark color, and that just spiced it up a little. Sometimes only using markers in the same color family, which would be the first, which would be the letter, like YG and the first number. If you only use those color families, you'll get wonderful results, but it also is a little bland sometimes. Now I'm coming in and coloring around all the edges of that greenery with the W0 marker, just so that it matches with the outline of the flower. Then I'm just fussy cutting out the flower. I leave a little bit more room around the edges than Sharon did. I think either way that you did it, it would be okay. When I realized I'd left quite a bit extra, or more than she had, I was already so far into the process that I was like, well, I'll just leave it. I think it looks fine. So, next I'm taking this little focal image, and I'm going to take a picture so I don't lose it. Well, here I'm kind of checking against. I do add more greenery than she had, but that's because the flower is significantly smaller than her flower. So I wanted to have the same visual size. I took some purple tape and taped the top so that everything was held together while I went on and moved to other parts. There are two different pattern papers in the card that I'm casing. In the background, the very far back pattern paper is this green with red and blue colored paper, and you can barely see any of it. But I thought, what fun if I create something on my iPad, and the app I'm using here is Procreate. It was so simple. I just colored in the background with that light green picked a brush that made those that motif in the background, and then used some splatter brushes to create the blue and the red, and just printed that out with my printer, and you'll see that in a minute. Then I started to work on the other pattern paper, which is in between that green pattern paper and the flower image. So I picked out this label image from my Cricut, because in that pattern paper there's this label image, and I'll show you that in just a minute. But I decided to cut that out with fun foam, because then I could just stamp it down, because you can just stamp with fun foam. I've been wanting to try cutting out fun foam with my Cricut for literally months, and finally I had a chance, an awesome opportunity to do that. Well, here is the tape dispenser I showed you in last week's Tuesday video, so if you haven't seen that, go check it out. It's awesome. And I'm just taping down that fun foam to my strong grip mat. I don't think I actually needed the tape. The strong grip mat held it perfectly. Here I'm pushing those star wheels to the very edge, and I'm cutting not with my craft knife blade, but with just the regular blade, and that was a mistake because it didn't cut deep enough. Next time I'm definitely going to use the craft knife blade, because I had to come back and just follow the edges and cut around with my actual craft knife, which was fine and took a whole 2 minutes, but it's just kind of annoying, and I didn't get as good of a cut as I really wanted. But if you do have to do this, then you're going to want to do it on a self-healing mat, or like I'm doing, which is a glass mat. Next, I'm taking some of this temporary sticky adhesive that you spray on, and I sprayed the back of that. So I'm using some antique linen on a 5.5 by 4.25 piece of paper. I do end up cutting this down a little bit, but I decided to start with the bigger size so then I could cut off whatever edges I didn't like as much. And I'm just using a makeup brush to blend that on. It gives it a very fun look, vintagey but still cute. Next, I'm taking some old paper, and then around the edges I use this vintage photo distress oxide and stamp that down. If you can see on my phone, on the top left of that paper where they have the little moth, it's actually a little label shape, and I just loved that detail of that cardstock, so I loved that I was able to recreate that without having to buy any new stamps or dies. I think that's the good part about having a Cricut or a Silhouette or a Brother Scan and Cut, is that for things that you're not going to use over and over and over again, it's awesome to have an electronic die cutter, so the 1 or 2 times you actually need to cut out that shape, you can do that. Next, I just wanted to create some background images, and one of the things that I saw in her pattern paper was it had some red flowers, so I wanted to add that, but I didn't want it to be so in your face, so I stamped it off and used the 2nd generation stamp to stamp those red flowers. Next, I wanted to get some text, so I used the vintage photo distress oxide ink and stamped that Tim Holtz scripty background stamp there in the middle. I decided to stamp the butterfly because I didn't have a moth, but I felt like the butterfly was close enough. So I'm stamping that with some Onyx Black ink, VersaFine Onyx Black ink, which is a pigment ink and is going to allow me to put some clear embossing powder over the top. And you can see there I barely had enough to cover that, but it covers it and it makes it really glossy, and it really fits with the original image. Next, I'm taking just a random stamp that I felt like had the right amount of detail versus negative space that some of the background images in her background paper had. And I'm going to stamp that once with just regular old Distress Oxide and old paper. And then I decided I wanted some of the green elements. On hers, she kind of has like a bird cage. So I stamped that same stamp twice and put over it some Verdigris Ranger embossing powder. But just having two of those really looked unbalanced. So I had to add that third one at the bottom. And I just put a tiny bit of that, but it really does balance the whole thing out. Then I just heat embossed it and it looked really cool. I was super happy with it at that point. So here you can see I'm printing out that other paper. All I did was opened the picture on my laptop, or on my desktop, did control print, and printed it out, so it was awesome. Then I cut it down. On one of them, I cut it into two different 5.5 by 4.25 pieces of paper. On one of them, I added some vintage photo around the edges, but it really just didn't go with what she had done, and I thought it looked better without it. But I did do the vintage photo around this piece of paper, just so that it kind of contained all those images. This paper I've cut down so that I think it's about 3 7/5 inches across, 3 inches and 3/4 across, sorry, and then about 4 inches tall. It's the same on the top and the two sides, but on the bottom there's a little bit extra space. Then the background image, I also cut down just a hair on each side so that a little bit of the white would show through. Next, on some Gina K black cardstock, I got this sentiment from the original stamp set that I used, the flower stamp set, and it says, "You are a treasure to me." Then with some Ranger Gold embossing powder, I heat embossed that. Then I'm just gonna hide that behind some leaves. I thought it would look a little bit better if I hid it behind the leaves rather than putting it in front of them, but I think it just would depend on what kind of sentiment you're using. So next, I'm not sure if I showed this, but I put a little glue behind the greenery so that it stuck to the flower. Then that was a whole piece, and I do add some foam adhesive behind the back. I just used a regular piece of craft foam, and I used all the tiny little scraps to fill it up behind there. You can probably be less penny pinching than I am and throw some of the scraps away. I have a very hard time doing that, and I don't know why. Actually, I do know why, because I learned this from my father, but I have a very hard time doing that, and so I just use all the scraps. And so this is the scraps from where I cut out that label piece from earlier. I cut around it and used those scraps to pop this up, which I think really gives a lot of dimension. When I glued the other two pieces down, I did not add any foam adhesive there. Once that was good and stuck down, I pulled the purple tape off, and I'm gonna trim off the edges on the left-hand side so that it's a 5.5 by 4.25 card. And that is the whole process where I copied this card. I think I did a pretty good job. I really like this card. It's currently sitting on my little ledges where I put all my fun stuff. I'm not going to send it out quite yet, but I really enjoy this card. I don't think I fully captured Sharon's whimsical look, vintagey look, but I do think I came pretty close. Let me know in the comments below how you think I did and if you have ever cased a card. Thanks so much for joining me. Here are a few other videos you may like. If you enjoyed this one and have not subscribed, you're definitely gonna want to subscribe because I have some awesome stuff coming up. And that's about it. So I hope you guys have an amazing, awesome day. Thanks for joining me.